A little girl whispered, "Please, don't let my mom die." What lonely CEO millionaire did unbelievable? The wind howled down the narrow streets of Bristow, Vermont, drowning the town in white silence. Snow fell in thick layers, swallowing rooftops, fences, and sidewalks beneath its weight. The sky was a dull silver, pressing low over the frozen town. It was the kind of morning when even the birds stayed hidden, and the world seemed to hold its breath. A small figure moved through the storm. Lila Hartley, 4 years old, trudged down the snow-covered street. Her pink wool coat was too large and faded from many winters. A single button was missing. Her knitted hat hung loose, one pom-pom dangling, half unraveled. Her blonde hair, tied into 2 lopsided pigtails, was soaked and tangled, whipped around by the biting wind. Her cheeks were raw from cold. Her big, round eyes, puffy and red, blinked up at the storm as she moved slowly, carefully, dragging her feet through snow that reached her shins. She didn't cry anymore. Her tears had frozen on her skin. In one hand, she clutched a gray stuffed rabbit, one ear nearly torn off. She gripped it tightly, the fabric stiff with ice. One house, then another. She knocked, waited, then knocked again. No answer. The streets were empty. The town was quiet under the weight of the storm. The cold pierced her boots, numbing her toes. Her lips trembled, her hands shook. Her breath came out in faint little clouds. Still, she walked. She didn't know where else to go. Then, she saw it. A large house at the edge of the street, standing tall behind a dark iron gate. It was grand, made of pale gray stone, with sloped roofs buried in snow and evergreen trees lining the path. The gate was elegant, with swirling ironwork that looked like something from a picture book. Lila stopped in front of it. This was not like the other houses. It was quiet, almost too quiet, but there was something about it that made her feet stop moving, something that felt safe. She stared at the gate, unsure what to do. Her fingers were too small to reach the call button on the gate's panel. There was a camera above it, but she did not know what it was. She looked up, then down, then at her rabbit. Then, slowly, she sat. She curled up on the bottom step in front of the gate, her legs tucked beneath her. The wind pulled at her coat. She lowered her head, shivering, her lips barely moving. Her voice was a whisper. "Mommy." A moment passed. Then another. Just as her head began to nod from exhaustion, the gate clicked open. Footsteps crunched in the snow. A man stepped out, tall, dressed in a dark coat and gray scarf. His black leather shoes left clean prints behind him. His face was handsome, stern, unreadable. He carried a briefcase in one hand. His car waited just beyond the hedges. Julian Thorne, 34, CEO of a nationwide culinary empire, was on his way to a critical meeting. His time was scheduled down to the minute. He had no room in his world for the unexpected. But then he saw her, a small shape huddled near the gate. He stopped, frowning. His brows drew together as he stepped closer. The girl looked up. Her face was pale, her lips blue, her eyes barely opened. And then, in a voice so quiet it almost disappeared into the wind, she whispered, "Please, don't let my mom die." Julian froze. For a moment, he said nothing, did nothing. Something in his chest tightened, broke just a little. He dropped the briefcase. Without thinking, he knelt down, pulled off his coat, and wrapped it around her. Then, gently, he lifted her into his arms. The snow swirled around them as he carried her through the open gate and into the warmth of a house that, until now, had only known silence. Her voice came again, barely a breath. "Please, don't let my mom die." Julian Thorne stood still in the snow, briefcase forgotten at his feet. He had faced boardrooms, billion-dollar deals, and entire empires built on precision, but nothing had undone him like those 7 trembling words from a child. He knelt before her. The snow clung to her lashes like tiny crystals. "Where is your mom, sweetheart?" he asked, softer now. Lila didn't cry. Her small body trembled. Slowly, She lifted one mittened hand and pointed behind her, down the snowy street. "I can take you," she whispered. Julian took off his wool coat and wrapped it gently around her before lifting her in his arms. She was light, cold. She didn't resist, just rested her head on his shoulder, clutching a tattered rabbit. Left at the fire hydrant, then behind the bakery. It's apartment 2A. He didn't hesitate. Snow crunched beneath his feet as he moved quickly, Lila's soft directions guiding him. Wind whipped across his face, snow collecting on his sleeves, but the cold didn't matter. His entire focus was the girl in his arms, and her mother, wherever she was. The building came into view. Old brick, rusting balconies, fogged windows. He climbed the steps two at a time. The front door was ajar. "Stay with me," he said to Lila. She nodded. He pushed the door open. Inside, the apartment was dim, small, and cold. The air smelled faintly of gas. A flickering light buzzed above the kitchen. Then he saw her. A young woman, maybe late 20s, crumpled on the kitchen floor, blonde hair tangled, face pale. One hand still clutched a dish towel. A bruise bloomed across her forehead, as if she'd struck the counter. The pot on the stove had boiled dry, curling thin smoke into the air. "Mommy," Lila whimpered. Julian set her down and rushed to the woman's side. He knelt, checked her pulse, faint but present. She was breathing, barely. He grabbed his phone. Ambulance needed. Possible head injury. Low response. Gas stoves on. Send fire unit too. He turned back. Lila had crawled to her mother's side, holding her hand. "She's breathing," Julian said. "You did the right thing, Lila." Tears welled in her eyes. Silent and slow. She leaned close to her mother. "Mommy, I found someone. He's going to help you." When the paramedics arrived, Julian stayed close. He answered every question calmly. He insisted on riding along, never letting go of Lila's hand. In the ambulance, he sat beside the stretcher. The woman, Cecilia, looked fragile under the harsh lights. Julian watched her closely, not out of curiosity, but with a quiet protectiveness he hadn't expected to feel. Lila leaned into his side. Wrapped in his coat, she finally gave in to exhaustion. Her small hand gripped his shirt as she fell asleep. At the hospital, time slowed. Julian sat silently in the emergency room, his phone untouched. No calls, no texts. He didn't care about the missed meetings. His world, usually precise, controlled, had narrowed to two strangers he hadn't known an hour earlier. Eventually, a doctor approached. "She collapsed from severe hypotension," he explained. "Likely from exhaustion and lack of food. She's stable, no brain damage, she'll recover." Julian let out a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. "I'll take care of the costs," he said. "Whatever she needs." The nurse nodded. Later, Lila stirred in the hospital chair. Julian handed her a warm cup of cocoa from the vending machine. She held it in both hands, carefully. "You were so brave today," he said. "You saved your mom." She blinked slowly, then offered a small, tired smile, the first he'd seen from her. "I knew you would help," she whispered. Julian didn't answer. But something in his chest shifted, something that hadn't moved in years, and deep down, he knew. This wasn't the last time this girl and her mother would remind him of what it truly meant to care. The ceiling above her was white, painfully bright. The walls were pale, sterile, and humming with the faint buzz of fluorescent lights. There was a beeping sound to her left. The air smelled faintly of antiseptic. Cecilia stirred. Her heart began to race before she could even open her eyes. Her first thought, like a scream in her chest, was not pain. It was her daughter. She blinked, lips cracked, throat dry. Her voice came out hoarse and trembling. "Lila, where's my daughter?" A deep, calm voice answered from somewhere beside her. "She's safe. She's with me." She turned her head slowly, eyes struggling to focus. A man sat in the chair next to her bed, well-dressed, a charcoal gray coat folded neatly over his lap, his tie loosened, his expression tired, yet somehow still composed. There was a quiet tension in his jaw, and something in his eyes, Concern, maybe, or something deeper. You passed out, he said gently. Your daughter came to find help. She found me. Cecilia stared at him. She tried to sit up, but her arms gave out halfway. Easy, the man said, rising from his chair. He poured water from a plastic pitcher and held the cup out for her. You're safe. She did a brave thing, and you've done everything you could. Cecilia sipped the water slowly. Her lips trembled. Her mind was foggy. Her body ached. But it was the presence of this man, this stranger, that made everything feel even more unreal. Why would someone like you help someone like me? She asked, in a voice barely above a whisper. He looked down at the cup in his hand, then to the floor, and finally met her eyes. Because I could, he said, and because she asked me not to let you die, and I didn't want to fail her. His words cut through the fog. Not dramatic, not romantic, just simple, honest. Cecilia didn't speak. Her eyes welled. One tear slipped down her cheek, then another. She didn't wipe them. She just let them fall, quietly, like snow melting. The door opened softly. A nurse entered, followed by small footsteps. Mommy! Lila's voice broke the silence like sunlight through storm clouds. Cecilia turned just in time to catch her daughter as she ran into the room. She wrapped her arms around her tightly, burying her face into her daughter's soft blonde hair. You're okay. You're okay, Lila cried. Julian rose quietly and stepped back. He didn't speak. He didn't interrupt. He simply gave them space. He turned his eyes to the window. It had stopped snowing. Later, when Lila sat drawing quietly in the corner with a box of crayons provided by a nurse, Cecilia's breathing had steadied. She sat up against the pillows, but her eyes flicked nervously to the clock on the wall. What time is it? She asked suddenly. What day? Julian glanced at her, surprised. It's Thursday morning. Her face paled further. I was supposed to work today, she said quickly. If I don't show up, they'll think I quit. I can't afford to lose this job. Julian frowned slightly. You just collapsed. You nearly died. And your first thought is work? Cecilia looked at him, then down at her lap. If I lose this job, I lose rent. And if I lose rent, I lose everything. There was no self-pity in her tone, just fact, plain and sharp. Julian stared at her for a long moment. Then he asked, gently, Where do you work? She hesitated, tightening her grip on the hospital blanket. Thorne's Table, the restaurant in Midtown. I work the late shifts, dishwasher, server, whatever they need. His expression didn't change much, but something flickered in his eyes. He said nothing for a moment. Then he walked over and sat back down, his voice calm. Don't worry about your job. I'll make sure it's still there when you're ready. Cecilia blinked. You know someone there? She asked. Julian didn't answer. Instead, he reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a slim black business card with gold trim. He placed it gently on the table beside her bed. I know the owner. Her eyes dropped to the card. Then slowly, back to him. Her lips parted, but no words came out. He stood, putting his coat back on. Rest, Cecilia. Heal. When you're ready, call me. Not because you owe me anything, but because I don't think this is where your story ends. With that, he nodded once and turned to leave. He didn't wait for a thank you. He didn't expect anything in return. He just walked out quietly, leaving behind not just a business card, but the feeling that someone, finally, believed in her. A few days later, Cecilia called. Her voice was quiet, uncertain. Julian answered on the second ring, his tone calm, almost gentle. He didn't ask many questions. He simply said, Would you and Lila like to meet me for coffee? They agreed to meet at a small corner bakery nestled between a bookshop and an old flower store. It wasn't a place of grandeur, no suits, no staff waiting, no chauffeur by the curb, just the scent of cinnamon, soft jazz playing through the radio, and snow melting on the windows. Cecilia arrived first, holding Lila's hand. She wore a simple gray coat, her hair pulled back into a neat ponytail. No makeup, no jewelry, just clean, composed resolve. She held her head high, though her fingers trembled slightly as she took a seat across from him. Julian had already ordered 2 hot chocolates and a black coffee. He didn't start with small talk. He didn't try to make it casual. "I'd like you to come back," he said. Cecilia blinked, lips parting, but no words came. "Not as a server," Julian continued. "As a team assistant at corporate. I read your file. You've done administrative work before." She swallowed hard. I had an office job before I got pregnant," she said slowly. "But no one wants someone with gaps in their resume." Julian leaned forward slightly. "This isn't about what other people want. It's about what you've already proven. You've worked 2 jobs, raised a child alone, never missed a single shift until the day your body couldn't go any further." He paused, letting the words settle. "That's not weakness. That's strength." Cecilia looked away, blinking fast. Her hands clenched in her lap. For a long moment, she said nothing. And then, unexpectedly, Lila spoke up. "If Mommy works near your office, can I come too?" she asked brightly. Julian turned to her, smiling. "We'll save a spot just for you." From his briefcase, he pulled out a small package, a box of crayons and a coloring book with forest animals on the cover. Nothing flashy, nothing expensive, but clearly chosen with thought. Lila lit up. "For me?" Julian nodded. "For you. To use while you wait for Mommy." Cecilia watched the exchange silently. She looked at the book, then at her daughter's face, then finally back at Julian. "You didn't have to do this," she said softly. "I know," he replied. They finished their drinks quietly. No pressure, no expectations. As they prepared to leave, Julian stood and helped Cecilia into her coat, an automatic gesture, respectful, not showy. He bent slightly to zip up Lila's. "Thank you," Cecilia said, her voice steady now, "for giving me a chance, not just for today, but for believing I could do more." Julian met her gaze for a second too long. "I didn't give you anything," he said. "You earned it. I'm just making sure the world finally noticed." They stepped outside into the soft afternoon light. The snow had stopped, and the sidewalks were slick with meltwater. Cecilia and Lila walked away, hand in hand, the little girl waving once before skipping ahead. Julian stayed behind. He returned to the table, still warm from the 3 of them. His assistant approached quietly, holding out a file. "I updated the onboarding packet," she said, then hesitated. "Sir, may I ask something?" He looked up. "Why her?" she asked gently. Julian was quiet for a long time. Finally, he said, "Because once, I had a sister who was just as strong, but the world didn't help her in time." He looked back toward the door where Cecilia had just walked out. "Maybe this time, I can." The words hung in the air, simple and final. He wasn't saving someone. He was correcting something the world had failed to do before, and this time, he refused to look away. It started as an ordinary afternoon. Cecilia had an unexpected meeting scheduled with the new regional managers, an internal shakeup she couldn't afford to miss. It would take 2 hours, maybe more. Normally, she would have declined the late notice, but when Julian offered to watch Lila at his home, she accepted. It wasn't the first time. Over the past few weeks, Julian and Lila had built their own quiet bond. He'd even converted one of his upstairs reading rooms into a Lila corner, with soft beanbags, coloring books, children's novels, and a small chalkboard with her name written in perfect cursive, Lila's Library. Julian worked from home that day. His conference calls were lined up back to back, but he promised Cecilia he'd keep a close eye. "Go win your meeting," he said. "We've got this." While Julian took a call in his study, Lila wandered the halls of the house. She was quiet, thoughtful. Whenever she missed her mom, she had a habit, playing hide and seek, even when she was alone. Her footsteps led her to the basement. Julian had mentioned that part of the house was under renovation. The hallway was dim, but Lila spotted a small door, slightly open. Curious, she tiptoed inside the storage room, lined with boxes and old furniture. The door shut behind her. With a heavy click, the latch slid into place. She reached for the knob, but it wouldn't budge. Julian was still on the phone when 20 minutes passed. He ended the call and glanced at the hallway. Silence. "Lila?" he called. "Where'd you go, little explorer?" No answer. He walked upstairs, checked the reading room, the guest bedroom, the kitchen. Nothing. "Lila?" His voice was sharper now. "Hey, this isn't funny." Panic began to creep into his chest. He moved faster, checking closets, under tables, behind curtains. His steps echoed in the vast house, but there was no sound except the distant hum of the HVAC system and the low rumble of the vacuum cleaner one of the staff had left running upstairs. Then he heard it. A soft, muffled thump. Faint, almost imagined. He dropped to his knees, ear against the floor. A tiny voice, barely a whisper, was crying beneath him. "Mr. Julian, I can't breathe." He bolted. Down the stairs, into the basement, his footsteps pounding. He reached the storage room and tried the handle. Locked. "Lila, stay with me." He could hear her sobbing now. Short, panicked gasps. The air inside that room was stale and cold. She was scared, and she was alone. Julian didn't wait. He shouted upstairs, "Get me a crowbar, now!" One of the staff scrambled, but he didn't wait for tools. He slammed his shoulder into the door once, twice. A sharp pain shot through his upper arm. The metal latch held firm. The third hit drew blood from his elbow as he scraped the doorframe. By the fourth, the wood began to crack, and on the fifth, it gave way with a loud snap. The door swung open. Lila was curled up in the corner of the room, trembling. Her cheeks were pale, streaked with tears. Her tiny hands were red from pounding the door. She couldn't even speak, just gasped in short, shallow breaths. Julian rushed in and fell to his knees beside her. He scooped her into his arms without saying a word. He held her tightly, rocking her gently, one hand cradling the back of her head. He didn't speak for several seconds, just breathed with her, matched her heartbeat, let her sob into his shirt. Then, softly, voice thick, "You're safe now. I've got you. I promise. I won't ever let you be scared again." Later, a call went out to Cecilia. She ran into the house not long after, breathless, eyes wide with fear. She found them in the living room, Lila asleep in Julian's arms, wrapped in a soft blanket. Julian sat still, one arm protectively around the child, his shirt stained, sleeve torn, and blood seeping through the fabric at his elbow. "I should have been with her," Cecilia choked out. Julian looked at her, not with blame, not with pity, but with something deeper. "You're not alone anymore," he said. His voice didn't tremble, but hers did. That night, Julian set the table for 3. No titles, no formality, no role to play. Just one man, one woman, and a little girl who no longer wanted to go home. Lila climbed into his chair at the dining table and looked up. "I don't want to go home yet," she said quietly. Julian glanced at Cecilia, then back at Lila. "Then don't," he said. "Not tonight. Not if you don't want to." The morning after they spent the night at Julian's house, Cecilia and Lila returned to their small apartment. There, sitting quietly just outside their door, was a large box. Not delivered, not packaged, just gently placed there. Inside were picture books, fresh groceries, cartons of milk, and a neat toolbox. On top was a folded sheet of paper, handwritten in clean, steady script. "You shouldn't have to fix everything by yourself." Cecilia stood still for a moment, staring down at it. She didn't say anything. She didn't have to. Later that morning, she arrived at the office. People glanced up as she walked in, surprised. Whispers floated quietly. Most assumed she would have taken a week off after the emergency. But Cecilia Hartley, as always, showed up. Hair tied back, jacket buttoned, chin held high. Julian passed her in the hallway. He didn't stop, but he slowed down just enough to speak low. "You didn't have to come in today." She glanced up at him, her voice calm, measured. "I know, but I want to." I still want to earn what I have." Julian gave her a single nod, not one of approval, but of respect. And then, as always, he didn't linger. He let her have her space. Still, he was slowly becoming part of their rhythm. He picked them up for grocery shopping on Saturday mornings, not because they needed a ride, but because the back seat always had Lila's favorite music queued up. He helped bake cinnamon rolls on Sundays, flour dusting his black sweater like snow. Lila would giggle, call him Chef J, and he'd play along with mock seriousness. And when Lila had to draw her family tree for school, she asked Julian to help. He didn't hesitate. He sat with her at the kitchen table, labeling each branch carefully. When Cecilia passed by later and saw the drawing, she froze. Next to her own stick figure was another one, taller, wearing glasses. Underneath in crayon, Lila had written, "Julian, special friend." Cecilia didn't say anything. She just ran her fingers over Lila's head and said softly, "He's a special friend." But she couldn't stop thinking about it. That night, as she tucked Lila into bed, the little girl hugged her stuffed bunny tightly, eyes wide in the dim light. "If Mr. Julian is here," she whispered, "why does our house still feel quiet?" Cecilia's breath caught. She sat down beside her daughter and smoothed the blankets, but she didn't answer. She couldn't, because the truth was, she didn't know anymore. Her world had always been defined by silence, by surviving, pushing forward, keeping everything stitched together with threads of resolve. Now, someone had come into that silence, gently, steadily, and made her realize how loud it had always been. That night, Cecilia didn't sleep. She sat beside Lila, watching her chest rise and fall, hand resting over her daughter's. In the next room, the toolbox Julian had left remained unopened, but it was there. Like him, no promises, no speeches, no pressure, just presence. And slowly, something inside her was shifting. Not fear, not resistance, but hope. A hope that maybe, just maybe, she didn't have to be strong alone anymore. Rain came hard that evening, drumming against the wide windows of Julian's home like steady music. The forecast had warned of flooding downtown, so Cecilia made the easy decision to stay. There was no hesitation anymore. Julian had already set the table for 3. He cooked dinner himself, spaghetti with homemade marinara, just like Lila liked it. Lila stood on a small stool beside him, proudly sprinkling cheese over each plate with the concentration of a master chef. Cecilia peeled carrots, slicing them into neat ribbons. Her sleeves rolled to the elbow, hair tied up in a loose bun. There was laughter in the kitchen, soft clinks of utensils, the occasional small splash of tomato sauce on the counter, Lila humming a song under her breath. For the first time, it didn't feel like a guest night. It felt like home. After dinner, Lila curled up on the couch, clutching her favorite stuffed bunny. She didn't even finish her bedtime story. The storm outside had faded into a hush, and her breaths fell into rhythm with the tick of the living room clock. Julian stood at the sink, sleeves wet from rinsing dishes. Cecilia joined him with a towel in hand, drying each plate he handed over. Their shoulders bumped once, lightly. He smiled down at the sponge in his hand. "I used to come home to silence," he said softly. "Now, I wait for your footsteps." Cecilia didn't look away. She didn't laugh it off. Her voice was steady when she replied, "I used to hate asking for help. I thought needing someone made me weak." She paused, folding a dish towel neatly. "But with you, it doesn't feel like asking." The quiet between them was full, not empty. Julian turned off the tap, wiped his hands, and gestured for her to follow him. He led her to a small hallway beneath the stairs. There, built into the wall, was a wooden cabinet with an old brass handle. He opened it slowly. Inside was a brand new pink backpack, small, sturdy, and embroidered with a name in careful, hand-stitched thread, Lila. Cecilia stared at it, mouth parting just slightly. "I had it made last week," Julian said, "just in case. One day she wants to stay." He didn't say forever. He didn't say family. He didn't need to, because in that one quiet gesture, in that small hidden space under the stairs, Julian had carved out something that mattered more than words. A space prepared, a space waiting, for a little girl who had once whispered for someone to save her mother, for a woman who had never expected someone to stand beside her without asking for anything in return, for himself, because somewhere along the way, the silence he once wrapped around his life had grown unbearable. Now, with them in it, the silence was gone, and in its place was something new, a home. Snow blanketed the ground outside, soft and thick, muffling the world in white silence. Inside Julian's house, light spilled warmly through the windows, flickering from the fireplace and glowing softly across the room. It was their first Christmas together. The gathering was small, just a few people from work, a neighbor or two, and of course, Cecilia and Lila. There were no crystal chandeliers or champagne towers, just cinnamon rolls on the table, strings of paper stars across the ceiling, and the scent of cloves and pine in the air. The walls were decorated not with garlands, but with photographs. Photos of Lila's crayon drawings pinned to the fridge. A blurry picture of Cecilia asleep on the couch, book in hand. Julian crouched by the kitchen island, tying one of Lila's shoes. All the small, ordinary pieces of a life that had slowly begun to feel extraordinary. The room buzzed with soft conversation and laughter. Then Julian stood. He cleared his throat gently and looked around the room. "Can I have a moment?" he asked, voice steady. The room quieted. He didn't pull out a ring. There was no velvet box, no spotlight. Instead, he knelt, on one knee, not just before Cecilia, but before Lila too. His eyes moved from the little girl to her mother. "You came to my door," he said softly, "and asked me not to let your mom die." He paused, voice thickening. "You didn't just bring her to me, you brought me back to life." He took a slow breath. "So now I have a question, a simple one." He smiled. "Can I come home with you? Every day, for the rest of our lives?" The room was silent, not from shock, but from the kind of quiet that holds something sacred. Lila was the first to move. She nodded so hard her blonde pigtails bounced. "Yes, say yes, Mommy." Cecilia covered her mouth with one hand, tears falling freely down her cheeks. She reached for Lila's hand, then placed both their hands gently over Julian's. Her voice trembled. "We're already home." No one clapped. No one needed to, because something bigger than celebration had filled the room, something that didn't need noise to be felt. Later that night, after everyone had gone, the three of them sat near the wide window. Outside, snow fell in soft, lazy spirals. Inside, the fire crackled low, its light dancing across the walls. Lila was curled in Julian's lap, fast asleep, her cheek resting against his chest, tiny fingers curled around the fabric of his sweater. Cecilia leaned beside them, head against Julian's shoulder. She spoke quietly, the words barely above a breath. "You kept your promise." Julian didn't look away from the window. He just tightened his arm around both of them and replied, "No, you're the reason I made it in the first place." And in that quiet moment, no vows, no fairy tale endings, just three people, together, in the soft hush of falling snow, something unshakable settled into place. Not just a home, but a life. Thank you for joining us on this emotional journey, a story of quiet courage, simple kindness, and love that stayed. If it touched your heart, please hit the hype button, subscribe, and turn on notifications so you never miss a story. At Soul Stirring Stories, we share tales that heal, inspire, and remind us of the goodness still in the world. Your support helps us create more stories that speak to the soul. Thank you for watching. Until next time, stay kind, stay brave, and never stop believing in love's quiet power.